The first time I was up here, I told the story that got a certain response, but I haven't actually defecated in that many holy sites. So this is just a nice little story about a trip in Sweden, but I know the audience, so there's 3 dick jokes in there for you, so pay attention. The overnight train out of Stockholm that goes all the way north through the country lets you transfer to a train that then drops down into Trondheim in Norway. But it doesn't leave until a little after 8 p.m, which means there's a whole extra day to explore Stockholm, or if you've already seen enough, the expert advice is to jump on the local train and head 45 minutes north to Uppsala. Right outside the station, there's a bus, the number 9, that will take you out of the city centre and to Gamla Uppsala, Old Uppsala. As you get out of the bus, the fields spread away in 3 directions and the ocean is on the last side. The fields are filled with barrows, so man-made mounds where people were buried. Most of them around 1500 to 1800 years ago. And there used to be about 3,000 barrows, but farming and other development means there's just a few hundred out there now. And there's also a museum. And on the day that I got out to the museum, I was the only person there, which meant that the staff to customer ratio was 2 to 1. So I turned up and asked if they were going to run the tour in English, and the guy who was working there said that yeah, they absolutely were. But I just had to wait a little bit because it wasn't scheduled to start, and he had to make sure that everybody who was going to be there had actually arrived and was there ready to go. He took me through the site and showed me the things that they'd taken out of the fields and the barrows around the area, and I was fascinated. I told him as we went around together that I was out researching for some novels that I was writing, and I had some characters who went actually to Gamla Uppsala because it was the medieval capital of Sweden. And he thought that was awesome. Hot tip if you're writing historical fiction, if you can find an archaeologist who is studying your area, hunt that person down and make friends with them, because they will talk to you for hours for free, often with no prompting whatsoever about that topic. It was actually really nice meeting this guy because we were similar ages and obviously we had this interesting common. And so we were actually really very similar people, except that he was like a little bit taller and like a little better looking. He was better read, he was better educated. He spoke more languages, he had really good teeth. He like really bright eyes, that kind of like that Scandinavian beard where it's like soft but it all grows in the same direction, you kind of manicure it. There was a little bit of jealousy and some other confusing emotions, is what I'm saying. But we hit it off and we were having a really good time, and the tour ended at these huge windows that look out over the fields. And the reason the windows are built where they are is to look at the 3 royal mounds. And we stood in front of the windows and he explained to me that Gamla Uppsala wasn't just the capital, it was also a holy site. And the belief was that there was a temple to the pagan gods in this location. They haven't found it so far, but it used to be the site of a mass sacrifice every 9 years. Every 9 years, 9 of 9 different animals would be sacrificed, everything from cows down to chickens. And once they'd killed the chickens, they would hang them from the trees in what was then a forest in the area and let them bleed out, and they would have this celebration across 9 days, which is a super Scandinavian way to celebrate, right? Like 9 days with your cocks out. So we finished the tour and we were standing looking at these 3 royal mounds. And he said, what's really interesting about the mounds is that they have 3 names. So each mound has 3 names that have changed based on our understanding of who was buried there. And he said, the most traditional, the ancient, the folklore name are the names of gods. Because these mounds are so big, they assumed that gods were buried in them. So they were named after Odin, Thor, and Freya. He said, have you been out to see them? I said, oh, I haven't yet, no, I haven't. He said, oh, if you like, I'll go and check at the desk, and if we don't have anything else happening, I'll take you out and I'll show you the mounds. And I said yes, because you do, and followed this guy out so he could show me his enormous Scandinavian mound. Thanks, excited person. We got outside and we went up onto what was once Thor's mound, and he told me that once sort of people developed an understanding that gods weren't buried in these things, they attributed them to the Yingling kings. Yingling kings are a big deal. Yingling kings are the kings that everyone wants to be. They're like the King Arthurs of sort of Scandinavia. There's a whole other site in Norway that I went to later on that had barrows outside it as well, and they said, no, Yingling kings are absolutely buried here. This is kind of an old fight that's been going on a little while, but in a really polite Scandinavian way between Sweden and Norway. He said that the three mounds were attributed to three of these Yingling kings, but that even then the Norwegians and the Swedes disagreed about the kings themselves. So the mound we were standing on was one that had been excavated, and it was attributed to this king Aun. Aun was a big deal because he died really, really old, which doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but he lived to be like 80 amongst a population of kings who regularly killed each other in their 20s. So like 80 was super good. He really got there, Aun. And he died in his bed. And that's such a huge deal that Swedes still call living to an old age and dying in your bed Aun's disease, right? The thing is that he's standing there and he says, the problem is that the Norwegians always tell these stories differently. He says, when we're talking about Yingling kings in Sweden, this mound is attributed to a king who, there were years of famine, and so he sacrificed himself and the famine ended. What? When Snorri Sturluson, the historian from Norway, writes his story, he says, oh no, a bull got loose and gored the king, who was just clumsy and in the way, and that's how the king died. The king in the middle mound, we say he was protecting his land and he was chasing off attackers, and he went too hard, he went too fast after them, and his horse got scared, it shied through him, and he died. Snorri Sturluson says that the king was greedy, and he saw a golden ring on the ground, and he leant down to get it as he rode, and he fell off his horse and he died. Now, Aun just died of old age, right? Snorri Sturluson says that Aun had 10 sons, and every 10 years, he sacrificed a son to give him another 10 years of age. Okay? So like, Snorri is not real nice about these Swedish kings. And he said that the tour guide, he says, it doesn't make us feel so bad. He says, we just talk about it like this, Norwegians, their kings are always great, our kings are always bad, they're always greedy. We say, when you're talking a lot of talk about yourself, you're telling Norwegian stories. Anyway, they excavated this mound because at one stage there was a theory that it was actually naturally formed, it wasn't man-made. And the King of Sweden couldn't have that, right? Yingling kings. So they dug in using the Heinrich Schliemann method, just like digging straight down and seeing what they could find. And they got some remains out, and what they got turned all of their understanding on their head. They found the remains of two people, a very, very young boy, and a woman, neither of whom are an 80-year-old man. And from that point forward, they stopped using the king's names for the mounds and gave them the third name. And the modern name for the mounds is just the East Mound, the Central Mound, and the West Mound. Because they don't really know who's in there, and they don't really know anything about them. I said to the guy, doesn't it piss you off? Like, for me, I write historical fiction. For me, that's the best stuff. It's like that grey area where, so history says one thing, but it doesn't quite elaborate on the details, and there's that's my play area where I get to mess around. But as a historian, and more than that, as someone who lives in this country, doesn't that really annoy you? Not just that what people thought about this was wrong, but that those lying frigging Norwegians have been saying this for all this time about your kings, and they don't know what they're talking about either. And he looked down across the fields, and he said, down along the line here, you can see where the main work is happening. because a train line's going to go in, and it's going to ruin all of this as it currently stands. And the Swedish government have put in place 3,000 archaeologists this year, and 2,000 archaeologists next year, and then 1,000 for the 2 years after that, to try to excavate as much as they can of this. And you can see where they've pegged out a village, and you can see where they're working on the other mounds, and soon they'll come and they'll open these mounds up, and we'll find out what's inside them, and then we'll know. And the truth is, none of that matters. None of it makes any difference at all to who we, Sweden, want to be as a country. The people who died and who were buried here, whoever they were, can't decide our future. Only we can decide that. Digging it up helps us to understand our past, helps us to understand where we've come from, but it makes no difference at all to who we are as a country today. Besides, snorri is actually slang in Swedish for wiener, and that makes all the school children laugh. So